Welcome everybody to the Burris XTR2 2-10 by 42 review. This is going to be edited in a slightly different way. I wanted to try something a little bit different that in my mind's eye would be a little bit more cohesive and a little bit easier to search through if you were looking for a very particular part of the video to see how a scope is going to perform. Now, in a perfect world, I would have filmed this in a way that I felt would have made that more cohesive video, well, just easier to follow. But unfortunately, I didn't do that with this scope, nor any of the other scopes that I have filmed since then, because I'm in the process of moving. Life is a little bit upside down. So I'm going to see how well this works, and if it doesn't work out well, please let me know in the comment section below to go back to my original longer format, and I'll do exactly that. But I figured, why not give this the good old college try, and if it doesn't work out, just drop out like what I did. And you know what? I turned out halfway decent. Anyway, what we have is a Burris XTR2 2-2 by 42. This is a first focal plane MPVO. These are made in the Philippines, and when they were brand new, they were around $1,000. You could find these secondhand for around the $500 to $600 price point, if not a little bit less, and that's going to put this in direct competition with some other more modern MPVOs of that same 2-10, 2-12-ish magnification range. This scope does have a massive amount of work cut out for it because there is a lot of optics in this sort of price point magnification range that really perform exceptionally well and are more readily available. The XTR2s have been superseded by the XTR3s, but to my knowledge, there are no plans for Burris to make a magnification range similar to this, which is very disappointing. I hope that one day they will come out with another 2-10 or a 2-12 or 2 to whatever. Something like this would be grand. In fact, I hope more manufacturers bring out more scopes of this magnification range because I do think it is perhaps the most practical magnification range out there. I quite like Filipino-made scopes. They strike a really nice balanced price point for their performance and their fit, finish, and build quality, and they're right in between the Chinese-made and the Japanese in all regards, both build quality, fit, finish, function, and price point. However, the Chinese-made stuff has become increasingly better over the years, and the Japanese-made stuff has, well, become a little bit more expensive. So where does that fit this now pretty old model XTR2? Well, that is what we're going to find out. While I've been chatting away, you've seen what comes inside the box, and it's pretty well optioned. It comes with some scope caps. It comes with a nice sunshade, even though I've never seen anyone really use a sunshade. Maybe I'll have to change that. But it does not have a throw lever for the magnification range, so that might be something that you would consider purchasing in the near future. This is a fairly stout feeling optic. Not only does it feel really good in hand, but at 28.54 ounces on my scale, it feels pretty weighty despite the fact that it's only a 2-10, but this does have a 34mm main tube and 42mm front objective, so that definitely adds to the weight. To bring in some sort of comparison to show you that it's pretty heavy for what it is, bringing in the PST Gen 2 5-25 by 50, it's about 3 ounces heavier, but a much larger scope in the grand scheme of things. Starting at the back of the scope, we're going to take a look at the fast focus eyepiece, which does have a very smooth outer edge to it, which I kind of like because it prevents you from accidentally having this thing bump up against something and turning. It does have very fine threads, and it is extremely smooth to also operate, as well as it, well, just being smooth on the outside. However, when you fully pull this out and put it in a quarter of a turn, there is a little bit of wiggle up and down and side to side, but it's a very minimal amount. Putting the scope cap on this thing pretty much eliminates any worry about that whatsoever, and it seems to lock up on there pretty good. As far as how the eyepiece works in operation when you're looking through this thing, just know that you can get this thing perfect to have the reticle be 100% sharp at minimum and maximum with no issues whatsoever. The rear focus eyepiece, ladies and gentlemen, is just to have the reticle be perfect to your eye. A lot of people don't understand that, but just know that when you get this thing just right, it is absolutely perfect. I do plan on running more segments to that to showcase how the eyepiece works for other scopes because it's something that I don't think is really brought up all that much. The magnification ring, as you saw, is just shy of 180 degrees minimum to maximum, and the splines on it are pretty aggressive. There's a nice texture on there. You do get a good purchase. However, you do want to get a throw lever if you're interested in moving your magnification really quickly depending on your environment. However, One area where I did notice a little bit of something fishy going on is that there is a little bit of play with the magnification ring to the actual magnifier body inside. There's a little bit of wiggle that you could very clearly see right there, and it just freewheels. Now, it didn't cause a problem for me, and it didn't feel like there was a problem when you're adjusting at minimum to maximum. It was still very smooth and easy to adjust for, but if there's play there, it makes me wonder if that play is going to get worse over time. As far as adjusting the magnification when you're behind the scope, as you could see here, there's no problems whatsoever, except you have to throw this thing pretty far going from minimum to maximum. Even though it's less than 180 degrees and the splines are fairly aggressive, so you have a good purchase on there, you still have to ratchet your hand back and forth to go from minimum to maximum. And the reason behind that is there's a fair amount of resistance on this magnification ring to change it. So even though you do have a good purchase on there and it's less than 180 degrees, you really got to wrench this thing to turn it, which is a good thing. However, if you did have a throw lever on there, it would make life considerably easier because you'd have more leverage on it, you'd be able to turn it easier and faster, and all would be right with the world. The illumination control on this scope is very Steiner-ish, and that should make sense because Burris and Steiner are basically owned by the same company. The way that you adjust it is with the battery cap, which is threaded on the outside, and when you lock it up, that is how you adjust it between your different illumination settings. You do have offs on either extreme, and the reason why they do that is so this way you can unscrew it like so, or lock it up when you do change out the battery. As far as how the detents feel and how the control itself feels, the detents are a little bit shallow, and it is fairly easy to turn it in between all the different brightness settings. But it's nice that it at least has offs on the far extremes. Not every scope that does have this sort of setup does that, and it does have offs in between each illumination control as well. Take note of the big O-rings that help weather seal the compartments, so this way you don't have to worry about water or any dirt or debris getting inside and destroying this thing. Threading on the cap is very easy, and once you get it nice and snug, you're good to go. However, I still must maintain that if you go too far too fast, I do believe that you could easily unscrew this battery compartment and not realize it, and maybe water and dirt and debris can get inside and cause you problems. But with just general light use, you shouldn't have that problem whatsoever. Another thing about this scope is that all the controls have very similar textures to the outside, so at least it has some sort of uniformity, which is something that I do like. As far as how the illumination looks, well, in a controlled environment on my desk at maximum magnification, you can see at maximum brightness it is fairly easy to pick up, and when we shut the lights off, it's even easier. The G2B reticle is something I haven't talked about yet, and it is a repeat of a Steiner reticle that was used actually for the military 4-16x50 that I reviewed a couple weeks ago, and I have to say it works extremely well in the 4-16 version, and I think it works really well here in the 2-10. In a controlled environment it looks great, but out in the bright sunny day at maximum it's just enough to just pick it up. But the illumination and reticle combination on this scope wasn't designed to be used during bright sunny days, it was designed to be used like this in dusk and dawn environments where the light is really dim and dark, and in these environments the illumination is fantastic. It's sharp, bright, and clear and works really well with the G2B reticle. I really do think this is a very wonderful combination. Moving on to the side parallax, it goes down to a minimum of 50 yards, so if you're shooting inside of that, unfortunately you're not going to be able to use the full magnification range. Even if you are shooting, let's say, at 30 or so yards, as long as you're within 6 to 8x, you should be okay getting a pretty good looking image. But if you do try to take the magnification to its maximum, you are going to be in for a rude awakening. The spline might be fairly similar to how the illumination control is set up, but it is much larger, so it's pretty easy to figure out which one is which in the dark. As for how it feels, the splines are nice and sharp, so you get a really good purchase, and it's got really nice dampening to it. If you're inside 50 yards, like how we are here at 30 yards on this power transformer, if you set it to its minimum side parallax and bring the magnification all the way to its maximum, it's not going to work out too well for you. But like I said, if you are shooting that close, bring in the magnification a little bit and you'll be fine. Anything beyond that, though, like these 100-yard paper targets here, is not going to give you an issue whatsoever. I found that the numbers on the side parallax lined up pretty close to what targets we were looking at downrange. And in general, I only had a very minor problem with it, but more on that soon. The elevation and windage turrets feature the exact same sort of splines that we already saw on the side parallax. I find it to be more than sufficient on grabbing it and making a quick adjustment. As for the rest of the look of them, the numbers on them are a little blocky, as are the hash marks on the turret, so this way when you line it up, it it does seem a little bit thicker than most other options. However, I didn't find this to be an issue when setting my zero. For any of you wondering if these turrets are locking, they are not. However, the elevation turret does feature a zero stop, which is the absolute minimum that I'll accept on most modern day optics. However, for the 2 to 10 magnification range in this MPVO format, I would love to see at least both turrets be locking, if not have the windage be completely capped and focused just on the elevation being exposed. That is honestly the biggest negative of this entire scope, and it's something that, for me personally, I can't get too far past. As far as how the elevation and windage turrets sound and feel, they're both good to very good. I would say well in line with the price point. As for why the zero stop seems so off, that's because I didn't properly set it. But keep in mind, there's only 26 mils of total adjustment on this scope. To put that in retrospect, the Athlon Helos BTR Gen 2 has 32, which is a lot more. Illumination down here is pretty good, even though I had to change my camera settings because it's too bright. We only have a side focus of 50 yards or meters. I'm not too sure which one, but I'm going to assume it's meters. Either which way, it's a little bit too far out for my settings, so nothing's going to be perfectly sharp on this. I know this thing is capable of a much better looking image than this. As far as how the reticle looks, I forgot to zero out my windage. There we go. The dots are 1 full mil, the lines are half a mil. Looks pretty good over here, but let's see how well this thing tracks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 4 and 4 looks pretty good. I'd say the windage might have about a click in it or so. Not terrible on the windage. Let's reset that. That resets perfectly. Let's continue on with our elevation gain. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And there we have 10 full mils. And let's count. I'm going to say it's probably closer to 0.2 of a mil or 2%. Let's bring it back to 0. There we are, zeroed out perfectly fine. Let's go back down 10 mils. Yep, we got 2% on our elevation gain. I just did this back to back with the PST Gen 2 5 to 25, and it was the exact same thing. 2% is not great, but as long as it's repeatable, it's not the end of the world, but it's still not great. We're going to go to the right, 1, 2, then to the left, 1, 2, then to the left again, 1, 2, and to the right, 1, 2. Let's check out the elevation. Going up, 1, 2, down, 1, 2, down, 1, 2, up, 1, 2. So the slop in the erectors, not really any to be noticed down here. The 2% is not terrible. Does it suck? Yes, but at least the reticle maintains a perfect line up and down and doesn't shift side to side, and there's no real play to the erectors, which is very nice to see. I figure while we're on the topic of seeing how well the thing tracks, let's see how well the image performs here at 1,000 yards with 0 mils of added elevation and then plus 10. At 0 mils of added elevation for roughly a 50-yard zero for a 5.56, at 1,000 yards on a bright, sunny, clear day, we have a very respectable looking image. Colors look pretty good, contrast is a little low, but everything seems to be pretty sharp. Adding our standard suite of 10 mils of added elevation and reacquiring our 0, you can see that the image does appear much softer. Adjusting the side focus doesn't do anything. Adjusting the camera in relation to where it's looking through the camera really doesn't do much. And it's not the best performance we've ever seen, but it's still not unusable. If you're focusing on a larger size target, let's say a full size IPSC, it's going to be roughly the size of that window, so it's not out of the realm of usable. But there are better performances out there for less money. With all that being said, let's really focus on the glass clarity on this thing and get it into some side-by-side comparisons. We've already gone over basically how all the functionality of this scope can affect its overall usability and practicality, but let's really just hunker down and see how good the glass actually looks to use. The conditions for filming were absolutely perfect. It was a bright, clear, sunny summer day, and there was very low humidity and very low wind. Focusing on our 400-yard target, bringing it from its minimum to its maximum magnification, the image quality on this thing is very nice. I also love the depth of field on this thing. Setting the side parallax just so, even though we are mainly focusing on a 400-yard brick building, that tree line around 250 yards in front and the tree line behind it around 650 to 700 yards is all nice, sharp, and clear. Meaning if you are going to use the scope to engage at farther targets, even at its maximum magnification, when typically you're going to have the shallowest depth of field, you can still use this thing for multiple distances on multiple targets without having to touch anything. Basically, you set it and you just forget it. You adjust the magnification as you see fit for your current environment or position, and you just run it. Again, that G2B reticle is wonderful. I think we often look at reticles and want more and more and more and more and more, just like we want more and more magnification and we want more and more bells and whistles and features. But I really do think that it takes away from the overall usability and experience standpoint of things. Sometimes simple really is perfectly fine. A modern day analogy that I can make is cars. Most modern cars have so much technology and things going on that it's not really so much that you're driving the car, you're sort of just like sitting in the car and letting it do its thing. Sometimes you just want to get inside your car, row your own gears, and enjoy the simplicity of it. A couple of things we didn't get the chance to talk about yet that we really should is the very small amount of scope body that we see when we look through it. It's really, really nice, as is the view looking through it. It is quite large. The field of view on this thing is also pretty impressive. 52 feet at its minimum and 10.5 feet at its maximum. To put that in retrospect, if we were to focus on the Mark V Leupold HD 2-10 by 30, that has 52.9 feet to 10.5 feet, so exactly the same. And the Leupold was pretty good in that regard, even though it had a smaller view looking through it, which you will be seeing quite soon. The exit pupil on this thing is also a very respectable 12 millimeters at its minimum and 4.2 at its maximum, and it shows. When you get behind this thing in a dynamic roll or even here in a very rigid setup, you have a pretty forgiving eye box on this thing. But as you can very clearly see, if you shift a little bit too far off center, the image really turns dark and gritty really quickly, especially here at 10x. As we bump the magnification down a little bit to around 5x here, you're going to see that yes, technically the exit pupil is going to get larger and we can look through it a little bit better, but the image really does fall apart very quickly, as does the reticle. This is what really separates a good scope from a bad scope. If you can look through a scope perfectly centered behind it and everything is fine, great. But the second you go off center and it falls apart, that really limits how usable that scope is going to be in a dynamic roll. Unfortunately, with this, above 3x or so, it falls apart very quickly. At 2x, it's much better, but only because we have a much larger exit pupil and we have more room to wiggle with it. But regardless, it's still not a great performance. In a more dynamic approach, you can really see how large the exit pupil is at 2x, but you can also see the distortion to the image every single time we go slightly off center. It's like having a really fast car that every time you step on the throttle, the thing just shakes loose and then wants to put you into a tree. It's good, but not completely usable. Bumping it up to 5x, the illumination on this thing looks fantastic, as does the G2B reticle as far as picking it up to the eye, but again, the image falls apart, as does the reticle sharpness when you're slightly off center. At 10x, it's extremely apparent and unfortunate, but at least the illumination looks really good. But again, it's greatly limited, and I have a funny feeling it's just due to its older design. While we're out here in the failing light, let's really focus and see how well the glass can perform in lower light environments. At 2x, the illumination looks absolutely wonderful here at maximum, and I must say that despite the fact the image might not be perfect on this thing when you're slightly off center, when you are right behind it, it does perform very well and does let in a fair amount of light. As we increase the magnification to 10x here, the image does get a little bit darker, but that's only because of the exit pupil getting smaller and smaller. It looks really good on camera because the camera has a fixed small pupil, or f-stop, but the eye will get larger in failing light, which is typically why you have all these weird shadows when you transfer into a smaller exit pupil at higher magnifications, and it looks shadowy and weird. It's actually just the effect of your iris being larger than the image coming out of the scope with the exit pupil. If that's a hard concept for you guys to follow, I will draw it out using a crayon and a napkin one day, but for right now, just know that it happens with every single scope on the market. All in all, however, its low light performance is fairly good. Let's dive headfirst into our first side-by-side comparison. And this first comparison is going to be with a scope you guys haven't seen yet. It is the SwampFox Warhorse 2-10x44. This is another first focal plane 2-10. Also has a 34mm tube just like the XTR2. Comes in around the same price point new that the XTR2s come for used, about $560. The Recce reticle found on the Warhorse is the same as the Kentucky Long, and it's good, but I would love to see those posts at 3, 6, and 9 be extended just a little bit longer to help draw my eye more towards the middle. Despite the fact the XTR2 has a good view looking through it, the SwampFox Warhorse is significantly larger in my findings, as well as a couple of other features that we're going to talk about that I think make it a better scope overall. It's about an inch shorter at 12.7 inches. It's about the exact same weight, only about an ounce heavier, but the field of view is where the Warhorse is really going to shine. It's 10 feet larger at 62 feet at its minimum and 2 feet larger at 12.5 at its maximum. As far as the exit pupil, at minimum, it's a little bit larger. It's 13 millimeters at 2x, but 3.8 millimeters at 10, which is about 0.4 millimeters smaller than the XTR2. The eye relief on both of them are the same, between 3.5 to 4 inches. The Warhorse, to me, has a more stable looking image and reticle, locking turrets, really good reticle in most cases. I mean, the drops on it are a little bit hard to pick up at times, but it's still a very usable setup. It feels pretty good in hand. They did make some changes over the Kentucky Long that I did not personally like, but more on that with the full review. But I do feel like the Warhorse, for the price, is a very, very compelling argument, and one that I think a lot of people are going to probably gravitate towards. The last point of contention is the SwampFox is made in China, whereas the Burris is made in the Philippines. On to an optic that needs no introduction. It is the Athlon Helos BTR Gen 2 2-12x42. This is a 30mm main tube scope with a 42mm front objective. Again, both front focal plane. These come in around $450 to $500, so a little bit less expensive than what you can find the XTR2s for. Despite the fact that it's much, much smaller on the main tube, as well as its overall length, you're talking about 2 inches shorter on the BTR at 11.8 inches or so, and 5 ounces lighter at 25 ounces, it still manages to have a larger view looking through it. And the AMHR2 reticle is, without a shadow or question of doubt, the reticle of choice for the 2-10/2-12 magnification range, in my opinion. The dot, a lot of people say, is too big. It's not fine enough for precise shots, but you just are a bench shooter. Go pick up a 5-25 and shoot bench groups. If you are a practical shooter that's constantly in a position or magnification shooting at different targets, both size, at different distances, I promise you that little dot is not going to make a lick of difference as far as how accurate you can be, but it makes your life so much easier when you're getting on target fast because you can pick it up very fast. Optically, it goes to the BTR. Stability-wise, it goes to the BTR. Everything goes to the BTR, including those incredible locking turrets. Everything goes to the BTR. If you really want the XTR2, that's one thing, but if you're willing to go with what the BTR is, well then, you're getting the best scope money can buy right now. My last comparison on this scope is going to be with the Leupold Mark V HD 2-10x30. This has a 35mm tube, comes in about 5 times the price. It is smaller, however, by about 2 inches shorter, and it is lighter by about 6 ounces. The field of view is about the same, both on minimum and maximum, but it has a smaller view looking through it. And the XTR2 does have a good view looking through it, but still smaller than the other two options that we saw. The exit pupil, however, on the Mark V is significantly larger, going from 12mm at the minimum to 15mm on the minimum with the Mark V. I should have worded that better. 12mm on the Burris to 15mm on the Leupold. And at the maximum, well, it's actually backwards. The Burris has 4.2mm and the Leupold has a whopping 3mm, which is kind of small. Eye relief on both of them are going to be about 3.5 to 4 inches, so pretty well standard. The Burris is capable of producing a better image than what the image here looks like. I did not set the side parallax 100%. I left it more at 100 yards and started panning across. And you could see that flag in the foreground is really, really nice, but the targets in the background are a little bit lacking, and unfortunately, I did not pick that up. The Mark V, though, despite the fact it has a smaller view looking through it, the resolution of the image is much higher. There's more information density, so the image does appear sharper, clearer, and crisper. Colors on both of them are honestly both very good. Reticle options is going to be completely personal. I think I do prefer the G2B because it does find that pretty good balance between fine but yet still usable at the minimum magnification, whereas the TMR on the Mark V HD is pretty thick and coarse all the time, but it does mean that the Mark V does have a faster ability to get on target. To be brutally honest, the Mark V is the clear winner here by leaps and bounds. Everything about it is better, but so is the price by about 5 times, so keep that in mind. So is this Burris XTR2 a bad scope? No, far from it. I think it's actually quite a good scope. It's quite a good scope for when this thing was designed, developed, and introduced into the market some time ago. Back then, this thing was a very well optioned and capable rifle scope. And I still think it does perform well enough for the price point. But sadly, it has been left in the tides of time because more modern companies using more modern techniques, using more modern coatings, better glass, better internals, have produced really nice quality scopes for less money than what this thing was new. Some would argue, well, a lot of the scopes that I compared it to are made in China, and that is very true, but Chinese scopes have come a very long way in the last couple of years. These Filipino-made scopes I have a soft spot for. Things like the PST Gen 2 line, in fact, the PST Gen 1 line from Vortex, the RT6, this XTR2. There's a couple of, the GLX series from Primary Arms. There's a couple of lines of scopes that are made in the Philippines that I really gravitate towards because I do feel in my soul, in my heart of hearts, that Filipino-made scopes do strike a nice balance between price, controls, and just overall build quality. Every time I get my hands on something made in the Philippines, I go, this is really nice. And it's priced reasonably. It's not, wow, this is really cheap and I have to wonder if it's going to fall apart, but it's not like, this is way too much money. It always seems to find a nice sweet spot. This XTR2 is one such example. You could find these things used, like I said, for around $500-600. That's what I ended up selling this thing for. And I feel for that price point, as long as you're accepting of its limitations, I think it's a good purchase. However, I'm a big stickler for having things like locking turrets, like having just a little bit more confidence in the glass when you're getting behind it in an off position. And this doesn't perform in that area all too well. If you are shooting off of a bench from a more stable, comfortable position, I'll say, let's say you're not trucking this thing in the woods, let's say you're going to pull it out of your bag, you're going to put it on a table, you're going to go prone, and you're just going to go shoot at distance, then things like locking turrets might not mean that much to you. Things like having super stable glass when you're slightly off center of it might not mean that much to you because you might be running a really nice tight cheek weld and be in a position where you're not going to be off center of it too much, if at all. So you might not even notice these things. So you got to take it for what it's worth. Be honest with yourself. Do you mind the features that this thing has? Do you mind how it performs? Are you willing to give up some of those things for the fact that it's made in the Philippines as opposed to China? For some people out there, absolutely. I myself find myself right on that line of going yes or no. I hate to say it, but there aren't a lot of middle ground scopes in this magnification range and setup. You either have Chinese made scopes of the $600 and cheaper variety, or you have really expensive scopes of like the $1,500 to $2,000 and plus. There's almost nothing in that $1,000 to $1,500 price point where it can give you all the features that you might want, or at least that I would want, and be made in the Philippines or be made in Japan. It's a real gray zone, and I don't know why manufacturers aren't trying to fill that void. Is this a good scope? I do believe it is, but it's not for me. It might be for you, and if so, I hope you enjoy the hell out of it, because I certainly enjoyed my time with it. But ultimately, I was let down mostly from its instability as far as the glass when I would get behind it in an off position. It was really, really frustrating, and that for me is an instant buzzkill and something that I cannot accept. So I sold it to someone that hopefully doesn't mind it and enjoys it thoroughly. Anywho, that is all for this review. Thank you all very much for watching, and as always, see you again next time. And a huge thank you to my Patreon providers and my Subscribe subscribers. Without you, this truly wouldn't be possible. If you'd like to support my channel but don't want to join either of those, I completely understand. But you could still help by using my affiliate links in the description below, and or like, share, and subscribe as always. Again, thank you very much.